Nishith presenting. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose lands the ANU operates, and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngambri and Ngunnawal people, past, present and future. And just by way of introduction, so Nishith is a member of the faculty of the Bangladesh Agricultural University, who has been doing her PhD here at the ANU. And I should pay tribute to Nishith's ability to keep chugging away with a PhD through all these lockdowns. You know, we have to acknowledge just how difficult it's been for PhD students, you know, to be isolated, especially in the colleges when they shut them all down. So I salute Nishith for her resilience and keeping on going and coming up with some interesting results. So today, Nishith is going to talk about changing gender relations in agriculture and food security, focusing on her research in rural Bangladesh. And this presentation is going to be recorded. So if you don't want your questions or answers, your questions or responses to be recorded, just let us know. But we thought we'd let you know it's being recorded. Okay, so please, Nishith, please go ahead.
Thank you, John. Let me share the screen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for here today. I'm Nishith Tanny. Today, I'm going to present one of the papers from my PhD thesis, that is changing gender relations in agriculture and food security. First, I will give you an overview of the conceptual problem related to women in agriculture and food security, followed by research questions. Then I will present the gender and class-based mechanisms, and finally, I will present my key arguments. Previous studies on gender relations in agriculture and food security assume that an increase in women's share in agricultural laboring and the women's well-being will go concurrently. At the same time, the studies assume that there is positive association between women's agency in agriculture and production diversity at the household level. Further, the studies also highlight that women's decision-making in agriculture enhances dietary quality of adult men and women within the household. Previous conceptualization on women in agriculture to nutrition linkages assumes that women's agricultural activities may influence inter-household decision-making and resource allocation. According to this conceptualization, women's contribution to agriculture can affect food and nutrition in two ways. First, women's earned income in agriculture can influence their capacity to spend on food and non-food health items that have direct linkages to food and nutrition security. Second, women's involvement in direct farming practices can affect their caring capacity and health practices, which have implications for food and nutrition. Within farming processes and regarding women's caring capacity, seasonality can affect energy expenditure and food intake. However, previous studies do not adequately address the links between income earned from agriculture and income controlled by adult men and women within the household, and the relationships with nutritional outcomes. Moreover, previous studies on women's agricultural work to nutrition linkages mostly indicate associations, not causations. Why and under what conditions women's increased participation in agriculture accrue better nutritional outcomes is yet to explore. Policymakers often assume that if they can increase women's agency in agriculture and they can build the capacity of women as farmers, that will improve the food and nutrition security. However, to date, studies rarely examine the dynamics of power and mechanisms that create and reproduce unequal gender relations within households. There is little solid evidence about the agricultural mechanisms through which women's greater engagement in agriculture may change inter-household food and nutrition allocation, including the links between women's participation, their bargaining power, and individual outcomes. Based on the gaps from previous work, I addressed three gaps in particular. First, I address how do agrarian class relations influence women's control over agriculture. Second, in what ways do women's work in agriculture influence intra-household gender dynamics? And third, how do the intra-household dynamics affect women's control of food and nutrition? In this research, I used a case study approach to address research questions. I took a case study approach because this study aims to answer how and why questions in a real-life context. It is a case of gendered food and nutrition security in rural Bangladesh. More women compared to men suffer from malnutrition. Development organizations working in the area, including Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee and Care Bangladesh, identify inter-household inequality in food and resource allocation. It is a case of feminization of agriculture where women are increasingly taking farm-related work. According to World Bank Report 2020, as percentage of total employment, 57% of women and 30% of men are employed in agriculture. I question existing linear understanding of gendered food and nutrition through identifying complex patterns and processes of gender relations in agriculture in rural Bangladesh. My unit of analysis is household. I selected 3 villages within Kurigram district for my study. I stayed around 7 months in the villages. I selected northern part of Bangladesh on purpose. Northern part of Bangladesh is the chronic food insecure zone of the country suffering from seasonal drought. Poverty is extreme in rural western Bangladesh and especially in Kurigram district. According to the cost of basic needs estimates from Household Income and Expenditure Survey by Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, around 71% of the population of Kurigram district live below the upper poverty line, while at national and in rural areas, the rate is 24% and 26%. Within Bangladesh, the incidence of poverty is highest in this district. Around 41% of surveyed households reported experiencing severe food insecurity. A severely food insecure household cuts back on meal size or the number of meals often, or experiences any of 3 most severe food insecurity conditions, including running out of food, going to bed hungry, or going a whole day or night without any food. A further 33% of households reported eating undesirable food sometimes or often, or cut back on the quantity of foods rarely or sometimes. Other 18% of the households never had to cut back the quantity of food and rarely consumed undesirable food. Only 8% of total households are food secure who only experience the worry about food rarely. From the case stories of the participants, I identified some causal factors that shape the food and nutrition insecurity of the study area. Access to land and ownership of livestock, sufficient farm or off-farm income, gender identity, and the access to development interventions are the key drivers of rural food and nutrition security. Participants identified gender as one of the important factors at the inter-household level. Since my focus is on gender relations in agriculture and food security, I explored the dynamics of gender relations and the individual agency in accessing different livelihood opportunities, productive resources, and food allocation. Among 100 farming households, 90% of women reported agriculture as their main economic activity, either in family farm, working in rented land, or agriculture wage laboring. The remaining 10% of women mentioned that working as wage laborer in non-farm sector, mainly at construction sites, salaried employment in schools, and NGO workers. Insights from these studies suggest that women's greater involvement in agriculture has had significant importance in improving food security in many ways. Over half of the women respondents from the 100 surveyed households reported their engagement in agriculture as crucial for household food security. They emphasized their role in managing family farms, agricultural labor, and participation in community agricultural development programs. Though none of the women participants from food insecure and moderately food insecure categories could achieve food security by their engagement in agriculture, farming helped them to escape poor nutrition. The role of the agency of rural women has been critical in accessing farming opportunities in the face of severe structural and social constraints. Over 1/3 of women from landless, marginal, and small farming classes could make farming and household decisions. Over 60% of women from 33 migrant households made all farming and household decisions alone. These seemingly positive changes in women's decision-making in agriculture mainly were facilitated by husbands off from work and mail-out migration. Household survey revealed that over 90% of women from 77 landless, marginal, and small farming classes contribute significantly to improve food security status. 10% of them reported their agricultural contribution as insignificant to improve household food security conditions. I argue that for poor rural women working in these study villages, access to farming remains critical. This is particularly the case in countries like Bangladesh, where non-farm employment opportunities for rural women are few. About 23% of the farming households, mainly medium and large farming categories, had an adequately diverse diet. Around 70% of women in these households reported their contribution to farming as significant for dietary diversity. Women's contribution to farming provided a means of diverse diet through more diverse crop and livestock production. Though the rural women have been unable to secure diverse diets simply by farming, their contribution to farming supports nutrition. Despite women's labor and economic contribution, there remain significant differences in food and nutrition allocation at the inter-household level. According to Food and Agriculture Organization, if an individual consumes food from at least 5 different food groups, then their diet is considered as adequately diverse, which is an important determinant of nutrition. Based on 24 hours recall period, I calculated the dietary diversity for individual at inter-household level. I found this surprising pattern of food distribution at the inter-household level. I did not find a significant difference in the average dietary diversity between adult men and women in the landless and marginal and small classes. In both of these classes, food distribution is mainly the distribution of dietary calories. These households cannot afford protein or other micronutrients regularly. This also indicates that there is equality in calorie distribution at the household level. Although their diets were inadequate, they were more equitable. For both medium and large farming households, the average dietary diversity for adult men was significantly higher compared to dietary diversity for women. This indicates the discrimination in allocation of protein and micronutrient-rich foods among male members and female members. In medium farming households, men had adequate diet, but women consumed food from food groups less than men. Only women from large farming households had adequate dietary diversity equivalent to 5. Still, there is a difference in dietary diversity between adult men and adult women in this group. On average, men consumed food from more than 6 different food groups and women consumed food from 5 different food groups. This indicates that at the intra-household level, even at propertied households, men and women compete for protein and micronutrient-rich foods. In the next slide, I describe the processes of inequality at the intra-household level. From the discussions with women participants, I identified 4 factors at the inter-household level that influence individual food and nutrition. The first one is labor and economic contribution. The second one is women's control of income. Then women's control of resources. And finally, women's voice with their husband. Focus group discussions reveal 2 different scenarios within the households regarding women's involvement in agriculture and food and nutrition security. The first scenario relates to women's agency or decision-making in agriculture. When women has the decision-making in agriculture, they can control their labor and income. That also helps them to get recognition from their husband, so they feel appreciated and valued within the household, and it results in their food and nutrition security. The second scenario relates to women's control labor in agriculture. When women can control their labor in agriculture, they can directly participate in product selling. It helps them to access income, and it also enhances their voice with husband. Finally, it results in food and nutrition. Now the questions raise: who could control labor, who had access to income, and who had a voice with their husband? This is the case of Khadija, who was an agricultural wage laborer. From her statement, we can see that as she can contribute to family income and control her labor, she could decide her food decision and health expenses. This was one side of the story. The other side of the story is also telling us that she used to get wages which is less than $2. That is not sufficient to meet her health expenses and meet the nutritional needs. Parveen belongs to a medium farming household. She has the mobility to work in the field. The religious belief and women's cultural image of good women and good wives could not restrict her from working outside. There are a couple of mechanisms working here. She did not own any resources. At the same time, her labor contribution to family farm did not bring positive nutritional outcomes for her. When I met Nurnahar, she was working in the field. She narrated how her knowledge of improved rice variety cultivation helped her to gain more power over farming and household decisions. She received training from the Department of Agricultural Extension. Department of Agricultural Extension also provided the seed. She could apply her knowledge on production and they had a good harvest. Her husband also started to consult her on farming. Nurnahar also started to control the income from agriculture. This is Roxana's case of migration and access to NGO. Roxana's husband migrated to Dhaka city, the capital city of Bangladesh. In her husband's absence, Roxana took the entire farming responsibility. They are small farmers. To supplement the family income, Roxana took a loan from Care Bangladesh Shohardotri program and Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, popularly known as BRAC, to buy a cow. She owned the cow and had control over income. She could manage to save money to meet expenses during her pregnancy. Mechanisms working here include migration of a spouse, active involvement in farming, access to development organization, asset ownership, and finally control and use of income. I found three mechanisms. They may look linear and simple. In practice, they are complicated as they are interconnected and influence each other. They work as a circle rather than an individual factor. For example, voice with husband can be a driver of individual agency and outcome itself. Those who have a voice in farm and household decisions have better nutrition. Food and nutrition security can motivate women to work actively in farming, which can lead to a more voice in farming and household decisions. These factors work differently in different households and individual circumstances. I explained the previous conceptualization that link women in agriculture and food security. In this conceptualization, I present women's food and nutrition as an important outcome that itself is generated from their control of labor and income. The factors in the outside boxes represent structural factors. In the study area, I observed women who can control labor and income from agriculture are taking farm management roles. The link between control of labor and income in agriculture with women's food and nutrition is positive, though the link is weaker for poorer women through the existing labor market arrangements. The rice farming system in the study area and the seasonal demand for labor also restrict the flexibility of agricultural labor. In the study area, the farming systems, labor arrangements, and the intra-household dynamics play an important role in how these various linkages work. In this mapping, both the control of labor and income are important. Women have to negotiate with their husbands regarding their farm and domestic duties. Women find mutual understanding between spouses most effective for household and individual well-being. These processes are dynamic and depend on individual circumstances. Individual level factors include their economic contribution, type of work available to them, and access to resources, and finally the relationships with their spouses. Previous studies assume that women from the well-off class can control labor and income in agriculture. Another assumption is enhancing women's decision-making in agriculture is sufficient to improve their food and nutrition. Previous studies also highlight that women's food and nutrition at the inter-household level improves through their labor and economic contribution. Based on my findings, I argue that women from both the well-off and poor classes can control labor and income depending on inter-household gender relations. Households with dominant male adults experienced restrictions in women's control of labor and income. In terms of enhancing decision-making in agriculture, I argue that though paid employment increased women's agency, lower wages restricted their ability to improve food security. In the study villages, the average wage for female labor was $2 per day. The wages women receive is insufficient to improve their nutrition conditions significantly. We also need to consider the precarious situation of the agricultural labor force. The majority are small and marginal farmers. Many are landless agricultural laborers, and overwhelming proportions are women. The casual nature of labor and insecure conditions of work opportunities in farming creates a precarious situation for workers who remain vulnerable to food insecurity. For individual agency and intra-household power dynamics, women's increased engagement in agriculture may seem as good. In terms of resource ownership and access, there is also a risk as women remain blocked from acquiring land and other productive resources. Simply increasing women's decision-making in agriculture may not significantly improve their food and nutrition situation unless women can access agricultural resources. Regarding nutrition security at the intra-household level, the linkages between women's increased responsibilities in agriculture and their improved nutrition occurs through husbands' recognition of agricultural work. I argue that when husbands recognize women's contribution to agriculture, this improves food and nutrition at the intra-household level. Women's increased agency and control over labor and income remain critical to this recognition process. I propose that intra-household inequalities partially delinked from class. Women from landless, marginal, and small farming classes accessed more wage laboring in absence of male wage laborers in the study villages. Women from these classes take the largest responsibility in agriculture because 25% of men from these classes migrate seasonally. Women took advantage of the paid employment opportunities which previously remained occupied by men who outmigrated. Landlords hired female laborers because of lower female wages rate. With the wages, female laborers could directly contribute to household food purchases. The direct contribution to household food supply helped them to access food. For women employed in paid agricultural wage laboring, working outside the home, and earning an income improved their position within the household. Earning income rather than solely depending on males facilitated their decision-making in food and nutrition to improve their well-being. The extent of women's decision-making in agriculture to improve food and nutrition security depended on the quality of their work. For example, though women's responsibilities in medium and large farming households increased, it merely enhanced their access to resources. Across agrarian classes, only 6% of women owned land. Finally, I propose labor and economic contribution weakly linked to nutritional outcomes. Women's labor and economic contribution, along with the recognition of their contribution from spouses, bring positive nutritional outcomes. These are some of the references I used in my work. Thank you, everyone.
So thanks, Nishith. If you'd like to stop sharing, maybe, Nishith.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so thanks, Nishith. Who would like to begin with a question?
I can ask question, John.
Okay, go ahead, Doreen.
Thanks, Nishith. That's a really interesting presentation. My question is simple, actually. So you look at the at the nutrition intake of women in the agrarian society in this area. My question is, does culture have impact on this? Like, for example, in Java, where I'm from, even in the well-off family that they can provide a nutritious diet, the women or the mothers will refrain from eating first because the belief that, not the belief, but the custom that, okay, the fathers and the children will eat first and then whatever left will be consumed by the mothers. What do you think about this in your research area?
Really. Yeah, as you mentioned, the context is somehow similar to Java, I think, because women eat last and least because of the gender norms and food allocation norms. Women, even in Bangladesh, throughout not only rural areas, even in urban areas, women always eat least and last after distributing to their husband and their children and elderly people. So there is different, obviously there is cultural factors here.
Okay, I think Keith has got a question.
Thanks, Nishith. Nice to see your presentation, and it seems like it's undergone some changes since your work in research proposal a few years ago. That's fine. Lots of PhD projects do that. I guess my question related to how you sort of position your work in relation to thinking around agrarian questions in Nepal. I could provide a more specific one afterwards, but first I'll just leave it at that point to gauge your response. How does your work is informed by or hopes to contribute to work on agrarian questions in Bangladesh?
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much for raising this question. Yes, when I went to the village, previously, of course, I was informed that there is gender inequality in agrarian relationships and also in resource allocation and distribution. Then when I looked at the food insecurity problem, I found that intra-household inequality within the farming households. That's why I took this problem for further investigation to explore the intra-household inequalities regarding food and nutrition among agrarian classes. And I found that not only, though previous studies assume that the poor are the most unequal one, but I found that not only the poor, but the rich households, they also compete for micronutrients and other protein-rich foods and other health resources.
Okay. I guess my follow-up is, I guess thinking a bit more theoretically, maybe, it seemed to be from the way you're sort of talking about it, you viewed sort of class as a force that was impacting women, right? So women are, and usually it seemed as though you were speaking of class in terms of land ownership or some indicator of rich and poor households. But I guess my question is, following people like Haroon Akram Lodi, if you sort of rework your idea of class beyond just landholding, where gender becomes a more integrated part of class relations, then that seems to sort of open up this sort of a broader theoretical field by, through which class relations are gender relations. So gender is just not influenced by class, it also in turn, it's a circular sort of relationship. And then, that could maybe, open up some lines of investigation around, how is gender part of rural production? How is it part of accumulation? How is it a part of agrarian class politics more generally in Nepal? So I guess that's my suggestion.
Sure, thank you so much. I'll look at the detailed work of Akram Lodi. Yes, in my class definition, I also accounted the non-farm income as well as the farm income and their ownership of land. And in the study area, there is a good number of sharecroppers. So according to the Bangladesh definitions of class, the authority counts for the land, not only the land ownership, but the area under cultivation. So when I redefined the definition, I also counted both their land resources, farm income and non-farm income, and their use of technology in farming. So to get broader idea of agrarian class, not only the land ownership.
Okay, thanks, Nishith. Tamara.
Thanks, Nishith. Great presentation as usual. I have a couple of questions. The first one might relate to this notion that class relations are gender relations. You said that intra-household inequalities are partially delinked from class, which I thought was a very strange thing to say. So I guess, my question is, why do you think they're delinked? Because it seemed to me that you were showing precisely that they were linked, but the link was different from what we get in most of the literature. And it looked to me as if the link has to do with the fact that there are different gender relations in the different classes.
Thank you, Tamara. Yes, I think I need to rephrase the word, because of course the class relation is there, and previous studies assume that the poor are the most unequal, but here we can see the well-off households are also unequal. So I think maybe the term would not be the delinked, maybe the pattern has changed, or there is a changing pattern of class relations.
Changing or just different from what people are
yeah, maybe different angle, yeah, because it's different, or I found somewhat different pattern regarding the class relations. So I think, yeah, not delinked, maybe different pattern of class relations.
Okay. I have another question.
Sure.
So you had a table showing that the medium and larger households are less equitable when it comes to dietary diversity. Yep. The smaller and marginal farms are more gender equitable. And then when you were going through, or after you went through your case studies, you identified 3 factors that were shaping the women's, I think that was shaping the women's nutrition. You identified, or maybe it was shaping decision-making, I actually am not sure. You identified husband's non-cooperation, organizational membership, and migration of husband. How do those, well, can you explain the differences in equity between the equity of nutrition between the different classes in terms of those 3 factors?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as I have showed in my presentations, in the landless, marginal, small farming classes, women are taking more, not only farming responsibilities, also they are making more decisions related to farm and households, because a good number of male members has already out-migrated, and at the same time, the labor and relative economic contribution is these households are high compared to the medium and large farming household, because their farm size is large and men are making more decisions compared to women. So these factors definitely influence how they control resources and food within the household. And these are shaping their distribution of resources within households. And
sorry, to be clear, I got the migration of husband is clearly a factor. What about husband's non-cooperation and organizational membership? Because they were the things that you were identifying in your case studies.
Yeah. When women are participating in the organizations, they are developing knowledge. When they are applying to this in their farming, so they are getting positive outcomes that is greatly influencing their food and nutrition. So meanwhile, their husbands starts to consult more with their wives regarding farm and household decisions that women are getting through their trainings from the organizations. That's how it's positively influencing women's food and nutrition within the household. And regarding husband's non-cooperation, even at the propertied household, we saw that as women are not owning resources, so they don't have enough control over the labor and income from agriculture, though they are significantly contributing to agriculture within these households.
Okay, I'm asking you to try and map these different factors onto the class inequalities. Can you do that? Or not?
Yes, I think, because in these in different agrarian classes, women's control of labor and income also vary, as women who are working as agricultural wage laborer or who are directly controlling agriculture, they can also control their labor and income. So it helps them to control over their food and nutrition compared to women from other propertied household or large farming households. That's making the difference within classes.
There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe I'll try asking a different way. When you went through your case studies,
yeah,
you identified 3 crucial factors.
Yeah.
Why did you not continue to highlight those 3 factors when you talked about the difference between the different classes?
Okay, yeah, now I got it. Yeah, because in my paper, I described it through different case stories. So it's hard to quantify these causal factors, because I can explain better with different case stories how these are happening in different agrarian classes and different households. I think, yeah, that's why it seems disconnected.
Okay.
Okay, well, thanks, Tamara. And maybe we can have a follow-up discussion about that.
Yeah, sure.
Next, we have Kuntala. Kuntala, are you there somewhere?
Yes, thank you, Nishith. That was a really good presentation. And yes, it has changed quite a lot significantly, but I think you have done a great job. Good presentation. My questions relate to what Tamara was trying to ask you. I'm thinking of the recent publication of FAO on Bangladesh, and also Binayak Shen's article that was published in World Development, just came out recently. They are saying that there isn't a only farming household in Bangladesh anymore. Pure, Binayak Shen uses the word pure household. Pure farming households are almost non-existent. And he calls it mixed farm households and non-farm households who live in rural areas as well. So I think what you are seeing is a picture of agrarian distress, and that is affecting different classes differently, and different classes are seeking different ways out, and how capital is being exploited, accumulated at the cost of women's labor. If you just not only think of class as an economic category in context of rural Bangladesh, but think of social status. For example, who are the matbars in the village? The matbars, religious leaders, they wield a lot of power, social power, and class can be redefined by you in context, and then show how this capital is being accumulated at the cost of women's labor. So what we are seeing here is, as feminization of, agriculture is actually feminization of agrarian distress. And that's very surprising, striking, because on the one hand, if you look at South Asia from a distance, global data, the statistics shows that Bangladesh is doing best amongst all countries in South Asia. It's, human development indicators, gender development indicators. And on the other hand, you're going into the rural areas and seeing this contrasting picture when women are going, without food and performing so much labor. So that big picture could also be drawn. So the feminization of agrarian distress, that's a Patnaik et al. Paper that you might want to look at.
Yeah, I did this paper.
And feminization of hunger, to be honest. Then.
Thank you so much, Kuntala. Thank you so much for these insights.
Okay, thanks, Kuntala. Very interesting comment there. Okay, so would anyone else like to ask a question or make any points? No, no one? No one else? Okay, well, maybe we could call it a day then. Oh, Keith.
I'll throw in one more, just to try to keep things going a bit. So can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, maybe the local and national politics of all of this? How are people thinking about this problem? What sort of interventions are happening? How are women's groups responding? Maybe sort of set out some of that scene for us.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. I have another chapter that is based on nutrition interventions.
Okay.
How is shaped by gender and class-based access. Yeah, I also found that, though in theory, women should get the access to development interventions, even in NGO mandate, they have the access, but within household, the control of resources is in the hand of men. So that's some findings from one of my chapters, and how these are affecting to their food and nutrition. Yeah, because in the study area, there is a good number of organizations working to improve the food and nutrition, because it's the most food insecure zone of the country. So, but yeah, at the inter-household level, I found these different class and gender-based patterns of resource utilization.
Okay. Okay, so thanks. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
I had a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry if you may have covered this, but these differences in gender, is that just between adult men and women, or is there also the way children are given food, is that also along gender lines as well?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. No, I looked at adult men and women because I had to calculate the dietary diversity between adult men and women. So according to FAO definition, if I want to calculate this, it should be within adult men and women. And of course, I couldn't go to children's dietary diversity, but I focused on between adult men and women within the household.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so if there's no other questions, we might call it a day. What do you think, Kat? Do you have any other comments to make or announcements? No, okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming along. And if anyone wants to, tomorrow, or anyone wants to stay back to have a bit more of a chat with Nishith, you're welcome to. Okay, but thanks everyone for some great comments.